when you hear those comments?
Yeah. I think it's I wouldn't say universal feeling, but I think it's a lot of pro athletes, or former college athletes feel this way. They know how the system works. I think there's also been an argument of how much did the college really set them up for this success, right? I mean, the college certainly does help, right? It can get you some more exposure, and I would argue, I think Zion Williamson coming to Duke this year may have helped him even more than if he had turned pro, right away out of high school, because I don't think a year ago he was a clear-cut number one pick like he is now. And I think having him face elite competition in college and just how he's totally separated himself, I think that's really helped. But for some players, they would say, well, look, I've put in the hard work, already, and you still were holding me back, and I'm not allowed to get paid. And some of these players, I mean, they come from very difficult backgrounds. They come from families who, when they were in college, they needed money to survive, to pay for bills, to pay for the lights, to pay for food. It's not easy, for some of these athletes. And they go into this system and they see benefits, right? So some of it is on them that they should attempt to take advantage of being in college and attempt to get a degree and get a real education, in the process. But we also know in college sports, not all, but in some, we saw it with the University of North Carolina scandal. We see it pop up a decent amount, that players are pushed through the system as well, academically, just to stay on the field. You've got sort of bogus majors or classes. You've got, grade changing, or tutors doing work for you, those types of things. So they get it. I mean, they see how the system works. And so for some of these college athletes, particularly, most of them won't turn pro, right? They're not going to be in the NBA. Mm-hmm. They're not going to be in the NFL. And then what do they fall back on? They weren't paid while they were in college, and either through their own, decisions and or through decisions made by people at the university, they didn't really get a quality education to help them moving forward in society. So those are issues that players see when they look at the college sports system.
So kind of on that note, I remember when the UNC scandal broke, and it seemed like there was a mismanagement of responsibilities, right? So, we talk about the NCAA kind of as a whole, but actually there's a lot of entities at play here, right? There's the NCAA, there's conferences, which are their own entity, and then there's the universities. So how does that share of responsibility fall within those organizations, right? In terms of creating new policies, ensuring that students go to real classes and get an education?
Yeah, well, the NCAA basically tries to. I think they're starting to change this now, or trying to with some of their rules. But when it comes to like academic misconduct, what they ultimately determined, what the NCAA Infractions Committee determined with the North Carolina case, is that their bylaws, their rules, did not allow them to punish the University of North Carolina for basically bogus classes that a disproportionate number of athletes were attending compared to the general student body. Getting these, easy grades to stay eligible to play. And they, in large part, they decided that because non-athletes were also in these classes as well, even though it was a much higher percentage of athletes in these classes compared to the percentage of athletes in the overall student body. So the NCAA, even in legal filings, in some court cases, one was associated with the North Carolina scandal, they have said that they don't have really that power to enforce what the academic standards are on campuses. That's up to each individual university. And you often hear, each individual university, complain. A lot of them have complained about the North Carolina decision. How is there no penalty? This is clearly, academic fraud and academic misconduct. And I actually agree. I think North Carolina, should have been penalized. But then when it comes to their campus, they all want to have independence on their own campus for their own academics. So it just sort of ends up going in this circle where, if the finger's being pointed at you, you want to be able to control your academic standards. But if it's really obvious that someone else, man, why isn't the NCAA stepping in and doing something?
Right. How much power the university has over their own decisions is based on whether something bad happens or something good happens, it seems like.
Yeah, no doubt. And the universities also, particularly the higher profile ones like North Carolina, they will lawyer up, and they will lawyer up with some really good and expensive lawyers who will threaten to sue the NCAA. And we have seen the NCAA get dragged into court cases involving, their own enforcement system and their penalties. Penn State, comes to mind, where they have, a University of Miami scandal from several years ago with payments, where the NCAA has made missteps, USC in the Reggie Bush case. And so the NCAA also treads lightly on some of this and has to be careful in their minds to not get dragged into a lawsuit that then, A, is very expensive and time consuming, and B, could have the courts sort of change their rules, as well.
So we're just coming up on the end of our time here, but I did have one last question for you before we go, which is, all right, it seems like a lot of these rules were made for a system that is a lot smaller than the current NCAA, right? Like if you just look at the growth that has happened measured in dollars between just how these different conferences are getting paid with their television deals and whatnot, that the rules were made for a system that's almost categorically different than the one we currently live in. Do you feel like that's an accurate characterization of the state that we're in?
Yes, to a degree, sort of. Let me explain. One thing to keep in mind with the NCAA is there are so many different members, different universities who make up the NCAA, with so many different diverse needs and interests. I mean, we're largely here talking about college athletes being paid, and that's really the tiny, small upper echelon of athletes and schools who have those type of players, the major prominent ones. Then you have others within Division I who, are they're Division I, they're going to the NCAA tournament, maybe they're playing some bowl games, but they're not at that level. Then you keep going down to, Division I AA, or it's called, FCS, Football Championship Subdivision for football. They have their own playoff level. Then you go to Division II. Then you go to Division III. You've got the Ivy League, which doesn't, even offer athletic financial aid at all. You have these, so many different universities that it's always made it very hard to change the NCAA rules because no one can agree on things because they come from so many different places. So one thing the NCAA did in recent years was create, for the so-called Power Five conferences, the five major conferences, the ACC, Big Ten, Big 12, SEC, and ACC. It gave them autonomy and their own ability to create some of their own rules to get some things done, and understanding that, U5 conferences are much different than some of these others, and go ahead and, offer, create cost of attendance rules, first before others do, if you like, those types of things. And there could be a day where we see those Power Five conferences or some sort of break off that creates new divisions or subdivisions with the NCAA, because there is this real gap and divide sort of between the haves and have-nots, and it even occurs even within the Power Five, where say like a Vanderbilt or Mississippi State is making a lot less money than the University of Alabama, even within their own conference.
So you're saying it's pretty messy, essentially, is what I'm getting now.
There will never be a simple solution. Just like, it's funny when people always talk about the college football playoff and why can't it be simpler and have everyone involved and let's have, 18 playoff and you do this winner and that winner. You have equal 12 team conferences, and then you have the runoff and, different playoffs within the conference. It's never going to be that neat and tight in college sports. Because one, say you're a Vanderbilt, why would you break off from the SEC and give away that money just to make it a more equal number and a number that makes sense for a playoff? There is nothing neat and tidy about college sports, and there probably never will be.
All right, John. Well, I think that's a great place to end. Thanks so much for joining us. It was fascinating.
Sure. Yeah, thank you. I really enjoyed it.
Thanks everyone for tuning in, and a special thanks to Jon Solomon for the great conversation, and to our producers Yano, Alec, MacMillen, and Andrew Weis. Our publisher is David Raban. This podcast is a production of University of Chicago Public Policy Podcasts.
I'm Andrew Weis. I'm one of the producers at The Walk-Ons. Thank you for listening, And make sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast app.
As China's role grows greater on the global stage, you want to stay up to date on the issues most pressing to China both domestically and internationally. Check out the Just China podcast for in-depth analysis on recent headlines and investigative reports on Chinese matters that affect our globalized world. We are Just China. Find us on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you enjoy your podcast listening.